All right, so today we have our monthly newsy roundup with my friend Paco Nathan, Principal Developer Relations Engineer at Sensing, where he works on Graph AI and Graph Intelligence. And for our listeners, we've been doing this monthly. And if you go to the episode notes, scroll down to the bottom, there's a link to the previous episode. So the reason I want to highlight this is the episode notes are actually turning out to be great
Yeah,
compendiums and resource lists. I do put some work into compiling all the resources and links that Paco and I talk about in these episodes. So with that, Paco, welcome back.
thank you, Ben. Good to see you.
All right, so let me start with SB 1047 for our
Yeah.
listeners who are not familiar. This is California Senate Bill 1047, the California Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Models Act. So I wrote about this a few months ago, but as I mentioned then, it was still being amended. Well, now the bill has passed through multiple rounds of comments and amendments, and they voted on it. It passed. The status is it's now in the hands of Governor Gavin Newsom, who will either sign it or reject it with a veto. So, high level, this bill covers frontier models, which includes both foundation models, so people who are pre-training, and fine tuning. So the way they frame it, they have certain cutoffs in terms of model size and and the amount you spend on the foundation model side. On the fine-tuning model side, they talk about number of operations and also amount you spend. So on paper, these limits or these so-called covered models are really kind of uh, cutting edge. So they're, like the cost for the foundation model side is 100 million, and the size of the model is basically, bigger than GPT-4. On the fine tuning side, the cost is 10 million, and the number of operations is non-trivial. So this is not a trivial fine tuning task that you're going to do. So you're going to really do a lot of customization and tuning on the model. So on paper, it sounds like, okay, so this actually doesn't impact me. But a couple of things. One, obviously, these numbers are not immutable. At some point in the future, I don't know. There might be some breakthrough on compute or some architecture breakthrough, which makes it much more amenable for maybe not the deepest pocketed teams to embark on one of these things, right? So either pre-training or really kind of heavy fine-tuning. But if that's the case, if it becomes more amenable for us to do it, but then we have all these compliance things that we have to make sure we do, we're going to end up spending a lot of resources trying to comply with this law. And then secondly, at a high level, I think honestly, this type of regulation probably should be done on the federal level rather than this patchwork state by state. Who knows what other states will do?
Yeah.
And then finally, I'm actually of the camp where a lot of the language in this regulation seems to be aimed at AGI and AI safety and AGI, AI run amok. I think we should focus more on things for managing real risks, right? So whatever they might be, bias, uh, unintended consequences, and things like that. And maybe the right approach there. And I wrote a post about this called "The Case Against SB 1047." Maybe the right approach there is just to refine regulations at the application level, right? So maybe for self-driving cars, we already have rules. Healthcare AI, maybe we should have much more targeted rules. and so on and so forth. And the example I put there, which I stole from Alfred Spector, which is, in the steel industry, you have different rules for steel based on the application, right? So of how you're going to use the steel. So maybe it's the same. We should take kind of the same approach here. So rather than kind of try to regulate kind of AGI, which is, I don't know if it's really going to come out of these LLMs, which are a bit of uh, I don't know if they can really be claimed to be the path to AGI. But but there are things that we should be probably trying to legislate and regulate around, which are much more targeted. So anyway, so go to my post, which I will link to the case against SB 1047. So Paco, on to you.
Well, I mean, yeah,
What says you?
what you're bringing up here, it
Yeah.
seems like we're using science fiction to regulate science fiction, because we don't really know what AGI is at this point, or how or if that's even a matter. But there are risks currently, and like you were mentioning, different regulated industries, but also say like legal. I mean, there
Yeah.
have clearly been instances where people are misusing chatbots to do legal briefs, and I mean, that should not be allowed as like a matter of like legal practice and ethical code and
And
law.
then people in that industry can figure out what the
Yeah.
right approach there is. What about this notion that I put forward in my post, which is basically at some point we don't know, maybe Paco and I can do really cutting edge fine tuning, right? So it becomes much more amenable and accessible. We don't know if there's some kind of breakthrough that might
Yeah.
happen on the architecture side or compute side. Maybe, I don't know. Right now, maybe that's doesn't seem clear, but this is a fast changing industry. And so if that's the case, and the proponents of this bill, or the bill as written says, okay, we'll adjust the wording for what is a covered model on a regular basis. But that doesn't take away from the fact that if I get to the point where I can actually uh, build a model that is falls under one of these covered models, and yet I still have to comply with that massive checklist, maybe I just think twice. Maybe I mean, because the things that I have to make sure I do is quite onerous, right? So
I mean, it's all changing so quickly. I mean, GraphRag is something that's really popular right now. If you look, GraphRag, the first real introduction of that I see was less than a year ago. It was like September 6th of 2023. If you look at RAG dates back. There were some instances of that out of the Go and the Lewis papers out of like 2020, 2021. We've only had a few years of this, right? And it's all changed so rapidly. And this law is looking to take into effect a couple of years from now, see if it gets signed by the end of the year, or not vetoed, and then being reviewed every year. But even that case for review is just kind of ludicrous compared to how fast this area is growing and how much everything changes. I mean, the operations. Well, first up, how do we even measure the operations that are
right,
cited in the
self-reported,
legislation?
right?
And so is there going to be model cards? Are we going to have some kind of counter on PyTorch that tells us?
So I think this
I
is
guess that's
more
one
of
question.
a liability thing, right? So the way I read it is, okay, so we're gonna go by with what you say, but if something goes wrong
Hmm,
and there's
you're
some
responsible.
lawsuit and then
Yeah.
it turns out that you lied to us, right?
I mean, I understand there's probably only a handful of companies that are really doing the very large models and actually training them from
Right now,
scratch
right?
right
So
now.
again, I
That
go
could
to the
change.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
And change in a heartbeat.
but the compliance list does not change,
Right, yeah, exactly.
right?
So we're
So
really stuck. And
yeah,
also it's like we have a compliance list here. Do we have one from West Virginia
yeah.
and another one from Nevada? I mean, and also who does it apply to? Because most of the tech companies are not California corporations. I have a California corporation, but most of the tech companies are going to be Delaware registration if they're US
No,
based.
but it's a covered model if you use it in California, I suppose. Kind of
So does that mean that I mean, what does it mean? Is it your customers are based here? Does it mean your servers are based here? I'd like to understand because that can
yeah, I
also
think
be
it's as long
mutable.
as it's accessible here, it's covered.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And then the third point here is geopolitical, right? So
Yeah.
It's not like the other countries are gonna be okay. Let's tie the hands of our frontier model builders.
Well, I actually think I mean, to me, the fine tuning is the one that really sticks out as being problematic. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot of tools to be doing fine tuning right now, and it's much more pervasive. It's much more of a practice, wider, and who knows what these thresholds, how they match up with
well,
what's
like I
actually
said,
happening in the
so
industry.
the
We don't know.
thresholds right now on paper seem high, but then they may decide, hey, Paco discovered a way to fine tune that basically makes it so that at a very, very much lower threshold, what he's fine tuned is capable. So let's lower to that threshold, right?
Or it
Right.
may be that, I don't know, NVIDIA or AMD or somebody comes out with a way of like, we'll partially fine tune for you. We'll get everything, we'll do a lot of pre-compute up front, and then you add in your synthetic data or projections or whatever
To
to do the
get
fine
under
tuning.
just to get under the numbers, right?
But then they come back and the regulators say, well, no, it's going to be cumulative now. So, I mean, to the extent that there may be three or four layers of other vendors that have done operations ahead of time, now do we take the sum of it? Do we take the last layer? This is all really confusing. And I can just imagine that there's a lot of attorneys who are going to make money in court, just
That's
arguing.
always the case. The lawyers always win. Now, by the way, so again, to emphasize what the notion of covered models, they say they're gonna review that on a regular basis, but they didn't say we're gonna review the list of things you have to comply with.
Right, right.
That's set in stone, right? So
I really do worry. I mean, you made the point about the impact on open source AI development, and I do really worry that, I mean, we are seeing a little bit of a bifurcation. We're seeing, the Llama family has done really well. If we call this an open model, that's
yeah.
also subject to interpretation. Um, so I really worry that like there are things that are workhorses for us that are relatively open, but those are the ones that the
Or
regulators are going to go after.
you can imagine, a consortium of universities somehow pull together their resources and somehow get to the point where they can, maybe not on the pre-training side, but on the fine-tuning side,
Yeah.
get to, be able to do something interesting. And so now they're going to be really, really paranoid about making that
Yeah.
available, right? So
I mean, we were covering before about the notion of where the physical world and simulated world, where like neural operators fits in, and I could see in climate science where there's massive amounts of data, there's all these different agencies involved, like NASA and whatnot, and I could see consortiums involving like reinsurance companies that have a real vested interest in having much better models, using deep learning models, maybe not LLMs, but some class. I could see that really getting tripped up as probably one of the early cases where the regulations would be, effectively going after the wrong thing.
so now let's put some skin in the game, and without looking at betting markets, let's predict where Governor Newsom is going to go with this.
But
Right
you're
now,
publishing a betting pool, right?
right now, so we're recording this first week of September. I think he has to decide by the month, by the end of the month. So my prediction right now is he's going to sign it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Will it go to the Supreme Court? That's
Now
even more of a nightmare.
some people told me that they think he's not going to sign it, but
Interesting.
what? Yeah, my sense is he's going to sign it. I don't know why, but it just seems like if you want to play in the larger democratic national politics, I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, what?
It can go either way, right? Because he can say, look, by the way, yeah. Speaking of which, let me bring up two more pet peeves that are somewhat related but not completely. So this notion that I mean, some people might get out of California because of this, right? Um, so one of the things I've never completely understood, Paco, is the way California politicians just kind of throw in the towel, right? So, for example, I'm just naming random examples here, right? So Oracle leaves for Texas, and or Charles Schwab leaves for Texas. It doesn't seem like the California state officials really put any effort to fight for fight to retain them. You know what I mean? So it's almost
Yeah.
like maybe they do behind the scenes, but we don't see any kind of public lobbying, right? So
I mean,
I
yeah, I mean,
I feel like maybe you should at least kind of make a show that you're trying to do your best, right?
I'm curious though how that would work in practice because I mean if you're a large enough team to be tripping these thresholds and you're training models, you could move that development elsewhere. And then and of course you can host it anywhere pretty much. So it becomes a question of do they just shut off the services to California
Could be.
if they would
Yeah, yeah,
trip over
yeah.
the
Yeah,
model?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
And
my
it,
second pet peeve is why are the California legislators so focused on AGI when I have a much more concrete problem for them to solve, which is the broken homeowners insurance market in California.
Yeah, no joke. No, I mean, I really do think I would put a lot of money toward lobbyists behind the scenes pushing this. I mean, the other thing that's suspect to me is the timing. There's the big Oprah Winfrey AI special coming up on September 12th, and just the tie-ins with the convention, what we saw. I do worry that that one
You know,
may,
I guess part of why I'm predicting Governor Newsom will sign it is just so that I'm prepared for that eventuality. But I would say right now it's not, it might be 50-50, right? Because he might,
yeah.
he's vetoed things in the past, right? So,
True, that's true. Yeah, it's not a done deal. I'm a little worried that the Oprah special is featuring Sam Altman and Bill Gates and this kind of like it's like okay, well, where's Emily Bender? So yeah, I do worry that this discussion is going completely tangential to what needs to happen because there are actual risks
yeah, yeah. And
and they're not addressing
the
them.
cost of complying with this laundry list in SB 1047 all but eliminates the largest, most deep-pocketed companies, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
which doesn't make sense because they're the ones they're trying to go after. Anyway, I wonder if vendors will come out with like we have California compliant fine tuning tools now. We'll make sure you don't trip the threshold. We'll probably see a class of those kind of products if this does become law.
Yeah. I still go back to my earlier point, which is fix the homeowners insurance market first before you
Yeah.
tackle AGI.
Yeah. 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 Well,
Uh,
I mean, in the history of California legislation, there's a lot of flip-flops in state court. Obviously, that's
yeah.
something that's happened. I mean, there have been cases where there were outside influences that made notable referendums in California that the state government and the courts like overturned right away. So I could see a lot of legal action happening as sort of the first order of business.
Yeah. 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 And with that, on to your first item.
Okay, great. Well, I'm excited. I wanted to talk about a friend of ours, close friend of ours. Holden Corral has a project called Totally Legit Company, and you'll find it at fighthealthinsurance.com.
Oh, yeah. I saw an
Um,
article about this.
yeah, I think San Francisco, oh God, what was it? San Francisco Observer? I forget which one. One of the San Francisco papers came out with it. It's really interesting because you if you I really like the health insurance provider that I have right now, and I have friends that work at insurance companies, so I'm not deriding insurance companies, but particularly in the low end, you do find that a lot of insurance companies are more and more using automation tools to make it extremely difficult to like get any sort of claim. And so, they're coming up with like weird reasons. There's obviously the voicemail hell that you go through with chatbots to try to get any answers, but then getting claims rejected for like bizarre reasons. And one of the things that Holden brings out in some of the articles is actually if you contest a claim that's been rejected, most of the time you win. It's just they're kind of a lot of the insurance firms, I guess, that would work on that sort of mass scale. Maybe not the better ones, but they are rejecting a lot of things outright. And they're using a lot of automation tools for this. Obviously, this is a really great place to be leveraging LLMs, perhaps. And so, flipping the script, what Holden did was to come out with a project so that you can use AI applications to write appeals to fight your health insurance denials. And so it's a first step in the appeal process that guide you through it. And almost all the health plans are required to allow for this kind of appeal process, but they make it really confusing. So by using AI tools, we can work through that red tape. It's kind of like it's mano a mano against these big enterprise things that are just impossible these days because of AI technology to navigate the customer service. And it's really interesting the uptake and how much people have responded to this. There's an open source project on GitHub that walks through. And I think that this dovetails with some of what we've seen before, going back several years of using machine learning to fight back against even like parking tickets, right? Okay, that was the thing we had from Browder years ago. Um, but here it's sort of an asymmetric war, and it's been an asymmetric war conducted by enterprise against consumers. Now consumers have the ability to flip it back.
Do you know, Paco, if her tool is California specific or people outside of California can use it?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm looking at right now
Because
to see if
for our
there's
listeners,
anything.
Holden
Yeah,
lives
no, definitely.
in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I don't see anything about that. The LLM, I mean, I don't know that that would necessarily, well, it actually could really speak to some of the legal implications. Everything in the messaging, though, was mostly focused on US, not
Oh,
necessarily
of
focused on
course, yeah, yeah,
California.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think that as like a next step, bringing in the attorneys into this to understand the jurisdictions, I think that would probably be a really good step. So if you're out there, if you're an attorney who's working in insurance claims and you want to get involved in open source with AI, this might be a really good vector.
Right, right, right. Very good. All right. So my next item, going back to slightly something technical, is the launch of Cerebras Inference.
Hmm.
Um, so for background, right? So Cerebras has this wafer scale engine. I think the first one was first announced at one of the AI conferences I co-chaired way back in 2019. And so with this service, now they are making their hardware available to users, right? So through an API. And so right now, I would say it's still early days because they only I'm not sure exactly what list of models they support. I think they support Llama and a few other Mistral models.
Hmm.
And so the thing here, it's supposed to be faster, right? Because
Yeah.
basically they have that on-chip memory, and everything is on, and the chips are massive, as you've seen, Paco, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and it's supposed to be also cheaper. So performance is better, speed is better, and then it's cheaper. So if the speed is cheaper, so if you fast forward to the future, if you have something much faster and also cheaper, not that we're there yet, but when we get to the point where you're doing agentic AI applications, where an agent, multi-agent, right? So one agent goes to another agent, and if everything is faster, then maybe it'll work better, is the thinking, right? So, um, but like I said, this is still early days. Obviously,
Hmm.
you know, they're not as well known as the incumbent cloud providers or NVIDIA, right? So, and so it'll be interesting to see. So also the models they support are tend to be on the smaller side right now, right? So they plan
Hmm.
to expand to Llama 405 billion at some point.
Yeah.
Um, the nice thing for developers is the API is just OpenAI API, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Plug right
but
in.
this is a market where you have established giants like NVIDIA and the major cloud providers, right? So,
Yeah.
there it'll be challenging, but uh, for us who are users of these things, we welcome uh, the possible entry of a completely new chip provider into this market.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just doing a live webinar about GraphRag, and we took some polls, kind of playing the old Databricks trick we used to do, but like taking live polls during the talk and then showing the results to get a gauge of the audience. And it was interesting because we had a lot of people who were interested in GraphRag. Zero had done anything in production. Maybe 20% had been looking at tutorials, and other people were there just sort of trying to learn about it. And I think that is representative. I mean, I think there's a lot of interest, but the fact is, if you go in and run GraphRag, you find that it can be very, very resource intensive. It can be expensive. It's slow. And so we do need the hardware to accelerate. One thing that strikes me about this, I wanted to run by you or just ask is, I mean, when people in the industry are analyzing about the hardware vendors and sort of the AI chip wars, one of the biggest things that come up is just the primacy of having a good software tech stack on top of your hardware. It's like 101 ratio if you look at NVIDIA and others. I mean, for every circuit designer, they've got 100 software engineers kind of thing on these projects. And so we talk a lot about that, about how a new vendor really can't get in to the space and be competitive unless they've invested in the software stack. But yet what you're showing here is there's already a good SaaS market for this kind of service. It's expensive and it's slow. So if you can be a hardware vendor to accelerate on those parts, but provide the same interface through SaaS, then maybe that's short-circuiting the argument about having the software stack. Is this changing the landscape of hardware for AI?
So to be fair, right? So no one has the equivalent of CUDA in terms of just the maturity and the ecosystem. AMD's ROCm, people are starting to use, and there's more efforts there. Oh, there's the open source initiative that came out of Harvard that OpenAI bought a company called Triton, right? So which
Yeah. Yeah, I was just
uh,
listening to
and
Triton
then
people.
there's Lemurian Labs. If you listeners can go to my podcast, I interviewed the CEO of Lemurian Labs. So they're also trying to innovate on the software side. So
Yeah.
Cerebras itself, they have their own software stack. Obviously, it's not as mature or flexible
Right.
as CUDA, but for this purposes of this discussion, they don't have to support graphics on games anyway. You know what I mean? So it's just a
Yeah.
few models right now, all transformer based. So what they need to do is make sure that they have enough support there so that you can run these models in production, right? So obviously there's the people who are using who might be using Cerebras to pre-train models. Enterprises or government agencies. But for us, we're interested in inference, and for inference, the surface is much more defined, right? So these open models, or if they have an alliance with Anthropic, maybe they can support Anthropic, right? So the hard
Mhm.
problem, the challenge for these hardware providers, hardware makers like Cerebras. Um, so first of all, Cerebras doesn't actually sell chips, right? So they sell these appliances because
Right.
I mean
Yeah.
they have to sell a system because the cooling and all the other
The
things have to be
interconnects and the
they
cooling are
yeah
actually the
yeah
hard part.
they have to set that up. So first of all, so who's going to buy that, right? So, well, the cloud providers buy that and put that in their cloud. Well, there's no sign that that's happening.
Right.
So,
They like proven
so
technology.
what they've been able to do is sell directly to large companies and large government agencies. But beyond that, if they want to expand, you can't wait for the cloud providers to put you in because the cloud providers are also busy trying to build their own
Yeah.
hardware. I mean, Google has
Oh,
TPUs, for example, right?
yeah.
So then either you sit and wait or you go join kind of this uh, cloud platform market. In their case, they don't have to be a very broad cloud. They are a very
Right.
specialized cloud, right? So,
And service. I think you had an episode recently with Jay Dewani,
oh yeah,
breaking
the
into hardware
Lemurian Labs guy.
software.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. I learned a lot off that. The software stack on top of hardware is really difficult because you also are changing your hardware a lot. You're introducing new things, you're doing new revs, and it may be that what you've done for your software stack is very particular generation of hardware. And so then you have to redevelop all over, or you have to build other components like, CUDA itself didn't really give NVIDIA the flexibility. It was CUDA plus a couple other major components that allowed them to have families of GPUs that could be plugged into the software.
Yeah, some of
Um,
some of which they got through acquisitions, right? So
yeah,
so
so
so there's a lot of advantage that they have, but there's also a lot of desire on the part of users to broaden their supplier base, right? So be that Cerebras, AMD, or using other hardware through Triton or Lemurian Labs, right? So
right,
there's
a single
definitely a
source.
desire to uh, broaden your base of chip suppliers. So
Well, it does strike me that this introduction from Service, it seems like this would pair really well with, I mean, what we've seen from like Unify, where there's a service that is measuring the cost performance across different dimensions for different models from different providers. And so if you can get that kind of, it's almost like ad networks, comparing the click-through rates and the costs on bids. But Unify has this way of being
yeah.
able to measure different vendors. If Service could plug into that, then it's very clear, where you're getting the best benefit.
Yeah.
Seems like that would be kind of a natural pairing. I think there's at least one other one like Unify, if I recall, but it seems like we'll see some effort
Yeah,
shift toward that kind of
there's a
landscape.
bunch of them that so Unify, full disclosure, I'm an advisor, but I pointed them to the Cerebras API, they're investigating it. So as Paco alludes to, there's a bunch of these services that, you basically it's single sign-on for endpoints. So you sign up for Unify and then you can use, I mean, basically I'm using a gazillion models from different endpoints, right? So, because basically, I only have a relationship with one API key, which is my Unify key, and then I can use all these other endpoints,
Right.
including Google Vertex, OpenAI, and Anthropic, right? And then you
And
can imagine Cerebras being in that mix in the very, very near future, right? So,
right, exactly. And
um,
it's like buying insurance actually for your AI applications because then, which specific service you're coming off of is relatively fungible, just depending on the current price performance.
yeah, yeah. And with that, your next item.
Next item, I want to point to something which maybe it's controversial, but I was kind of doing a deep dive into what's been happening with AI applications for the war in Ukraine.
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, this is controversial because
Impressive, right?
yeah, it's really incredible, and what we're learning from them. Um, and I mean, obviously, a lot of people have big ethical concerns about how much are we doing AI work for military purposes. And full disclosure, I've done a lot of work for DoD, and I've done a lot of my career has been neural networks for, say, target acquisition, subcontracting through SAIC and others. Um, and it's interesting to me because there was so much pushback, for instance, Project Maven, all the pushback from Google employees, Google basically walking out, but plenty of other firms to fill in. So I know that like AI and weapons development, that's very hot topic, very controversial. But the other thing is like the war in Ukraine is also a very hot topic. And I would like to see Ukraine win, frankly.
Yeah, and
Just full disclosure.
this is a case where it's completely defensive,
Yeah.
right?
And I mean what they're doing, I mean it does speak to a lot of asymmetries that are involved throughout, which are always difficult to project. I mean, asymmetries are why, any sort of any sort of industry analysis or future scenarios completely become tangled up. But what we're seeing is, to use the military term force multiplier, um, by using the AI tools, you can have human pilots who can operate with, you know, multiple drones at a time. And if you are out in the field and you are a platoon leader and you have an you have a position, you might send up a couple of drones just to see how your camouflage is. But at the same time, you might catch, some troop movement from the enemy off in the corners. So you might want to send up more. And after a while, it gets really hard to coordinate all those unless you have the right kind of tooling. That's one of the big learnings out of Ukraine was to be able to have like a swarm of 10 or 20 drones, uh, and be able to handle it and process it. And this speaks to sort of a big part of policy of the major militaries, of course, are things like CCA, collaborative combat equipment, where you might have an extremely expensive fighter jet, but then like this cloud of drones around. And they're actually the ones who are probably more in the front. So it's kind of drone versus drone. Certainly, that's a big component of strategy that's being understood more now as the US is engaging with more partners more closely in the Pacific because of what's going on with China. Um, but a lot of these are hypothetical. We haven't really seen them yet in combat experience, but we are seeing them in Ukraine. Well, I should take that back. Probably Syria is another good example. I'm sure the folks from like War on the Rocks would pull me apart if I try to go into too much depth in international relations. That's not my field. But we're getting good, tangible evidence of where AI can really play in. Another area is, of course, electronic weapons. There's been so much development in that over the past few decades, which is where a lot of the space technology comes in, but just the extent to which GPS and other sensors, other communications, et cetera, can all be completely scrambled by an enemy. It makes for our notions of warfare, on the surface almost seem obsolete, just because you're out there traveling at Mach 2 or whatever, and suddenly all your instruments are wrong. Um, so what they're seeing on the field is where AI tooling can work through perception different than what a human would have, and be able to work through some of the kind of electronic warfare jamming that has become so prevalent on modern battlefields. So these are a couple areas: the force multiplier and the EW constraints, and also just the fact that now all major militaries have this notion of, okay, where does cyber fit in at what stages, and to what extent is it prioritized during a particular part of either an offensive or defensive action, and then where does it fit in later? And so how do drone deployments and cyber tie together, which is something that we're learning a lot out of the experiences from Ukraine Army. Um, let's see. One other good thing that I would point out is that FPV units have a strike rate of 30 to 50%. New pilots, it can be low as 10%. AI-operated FPV drones hit around 80%. So basically, if you're sending people out into combat and maybe they are operating with drones, but they're not operating well enough, they might have 10% effectiveness, which means you take 10 shots, one of them makes it. Whereas if you're using the AI-enabled drones, it's more like 80%. And for people who are on the front lines, I just can't tell you how much this is important to their lives, their safety.
So a few comments. The first one is there's also the other impressive thing here is that in case people don't follow the war in Ukraine closely, is how Ukraine has basically taken out the Russian Navy in Crimea
Yeah. Oh,
with no
great. Yeah.
navy, with no navy,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. All
right?
all the drones, basically.
With drones, right? And then secondly, this is actually a good kind of uh, uh, use case for this combination of kind of computing at the edge,
Mm,
relying on the edge when you have
absolutely.
to, but then when you have access to a more capable model, relying on that, but always kind of assuming that you may not have connection. Uh, and having building an application logic that allows you to kind of basically kind of a router in that sense, right? So where you route to the best model that you can at the time, but
Right.
everything has to be done in real time. And then finally, this also calls to question some of the, how defense spending in the U.S. is a lot of it is basically lobbying and pork barrel. and these
Volunteer. Sorry, yeah.
and these legacy systems, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I think basically what this shows you is that yeah, you probably still need the legacy systems like the fighter planes and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
you need a lot of these kind of low cost uh drone swarms that Paco was alluding to. So one related example is a couple of months ago, Iran attacked Israel,
Right.
right? So, and then Israel stopped it with their Iron Dome and help from the U.S. and other allies. And oh yeah, yeah, people were going, yeah, this was great, super successful effort. And then I pointed out to people, yeah, but in order for them to succeed and block all of those cheap missiles, they spent $1 billion. That was one day.
Right.
You know,
It's
you can
asymmetric.
imagine
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
imagine your opponent having a month's worth of cheap things to throw at you, and then you're burning through $1 billion a day, right? So
Well, I mean that seems to be so the subtext, possibly some of the subtext for the Ukrainian incursions into Russia,
yeah.
where it's just, I mean, they're just making raids and it's causing all kinds of trouble and expense for Russia very asymmetrically, if that can be sustained. But yeah, this does bring in more complications with predicting warfare, obviously. But it does point to basically fighting the battles based off of logistics, which has been the lesson over, the last century, right?
So hopefully
And
the DoD will kind of look at their, I guess they have the equivalent of the big five suppliers and kind of diversify away from the big five suppliers to more nimble uh companies as Ukraine has proven, right?
yeah, I mean, where they've really built this out, I know that they had kind of like a citizen science thing going on for a while, building some of these drones. I imagine it's probably more formalized now, but there were really interesting early reports a couple years back about how people with the tech jobs jumped in to build out these drones. And a lot of the drones aren't really complicated. I mean, it's like basically having a grenade, flying over a tank and dropping it. I mean, there are things like that. They're not expensive. It's frightening in a lot of ways, but it's also happening. And we can argue about should we or shouldn't we go in these directions, but the reality is it's already here. And any major conflict will use this.
All right, my next item, which will be, so this podcast airs, I think, on the 19th of September, but towards the end of September, we have the Ray Summit, one of my favorite conferences. Um, it will be in San Francisco in person. They have lots of big name speakers, including Mira Murati of OpenAI, Mark Andreessen. But more importantly, you've heard me talk in this podcast about this pattern I'm seeing around tech forward companies or digital first companies somehow building their own AI, custom AI platform, even though a lot of these tools are available in the cloud. So a lot of those companies will be presenting at this conference, right? So Apple, OpenAI, ByteDance, Google, Pinterest, Airbnb, Shopify, Roblox, Coinbase, many more. Um, and they will explain why they've opted to build custom AI platforms and why Ray is a natural foundation for these platforms. So anyway, so this is a great conference to kind of network with people really building AI infrastructure in particular, but also AI applications. So I hope to see you there. And if you go to the episode notes, there's a discount code that you can take advantage of.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that.
And you, Paco?
How about I'll go into rapid fire and recommendation? There's
Okay.
there's actually one that I kind of want to go
Rapid
over a
fire
little bit.
first, and then I have my
Okay,
own
rapid
rapid
fire.
fire. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, rapid fire, I was pointing to there. I put this on LinkedIn and actually got a lot of circulation. There was a GitHub repo for it, also a paper, but it's called Mambular. And so it's Mombular, I guess I should say, right? So using Mamba, but for understanding tabular data, for and I could sort of see this is like the deep learning equivalent of yeah, exactly. You're copying deep learning equivalent of pandas on steroids. I think there's a lot of room for this in enterprise. Um, And I'm really excited to see this kind of direction. Mamba is, of course, more efficient in some ways. We've covered that previously on episodes here. Um, I also, something really struck me. There was a question in this GraphRag webinar I was just in. Somebody was asking, gosh, we're an enterprise. We've spent so much time and money moving so much of our content into, oh, I don't know, Confluence or SharePoint or something like that. Some of these big content repositories that we make public facing to our customers. Um, where are the tools to be able to build AI products off of this? Right? If we have structured data or even like semi-structured but in well-known content repositories, where is the tooling for us to be able to go off and do RAG systems based on this? And I was kind of struck. I haven't actually seen that level of like enterprise product yet. I'm sure somebody's working on it. But I'm glad to see this work on Modular. And hopefully again, this will kind of draw a through line between what enterprise really needs and what is available in open source tooling.
All right. So I have a couple of rapid fire topics. So on Mamba, I like it, but so far my impression is it's great for writing papers. But
Okay.
I haven't actually seen anything concrete. All right. So my two rapid fire topics. The first one is related to what you just said, which is basically uh, for folks who go to my subscribe to my newsletter. I recently wrote about, by the time this comes out, generative AI and how it might kind of impact the workflow and the nature of the work of analysts. So you go there and you can see some of the early signals from job postings. And it kind of relates to what Paco just said, because obviously a lot of analysts live in structured data, spreadsheets, and
Yeah.
things like that. And my other rapid fire topic, I don't know how rapid fire we can make this, but Paco, Telegram.
Oh yeah, of
Right, yeah,
course.
right. So Telegram, for people who are not familiar with Telegram, it's kind of like
Oh,
a messaging system, but also a social network, right? So there's
yeah.
subreddits and the equivalent of Reddits in their channels, and but so the founder and CEO of Telegram obviously has been charged in France,
Yeah.
basically around the topic of content moderation. Basically,
Right.
as far as I can tell, they don't really do much content moderation,
Right.
which is problematic, even if you are for pro free speech, because what about criminal behavior like human
Right.
trafficking and
Right.
whatever, child porn? So he basically is so hands off. Um, yeah, and so then the other question there is when suddenly Russian politicians are defending you, that's a bit of a red flag there, right?
Здравствуйте, мои дорогие. Yes, we
Yeah.
believe in free speech and
And,
freedom
and
for
and by the
all.
way, so it's also always described, and this is a pet peeve in the press, as end-to-end encrypted,
Oh,
but it's really
God.
not. You have to go through. You have to opt into the encryption. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway,
Have you,
I don't know if you have any opinion on Telegram and
I've studiously avoided Telegram just because
yeah,
there, everybody who's asking to talk with you on Telegram is like, no, I'd rather not be in that conversation.
it's huge, particularly in crypto, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
It was like, are you working in crypto coin? Are you a Russian influencer in another country? No, I don't know. It's just I had a real bias against it. But have you used Telegram at all?
Yes. Yeah, 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 yeah. In the past, mainly, around crypto and things like that.
Yeah,
But I don't anymore because now I've basically settled on Signal,
yeah,
WhatsApp,
me
because
too.
certain parts of the world, a lot of people use WhatsApp, and
Yeah.
Discord, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Discord. I'm not a big fan of Discord's gamification and interface,
yeah.
but yet I'm finding more and more there's a lot of really interesting conversations people need to meet and talk with that are on Discord. So.
But it's also the case that I think this might be kind of a harbinger for kind of this lack of content moderation approach moving forward, right? Because I just don't
Interesting.
I don't think it's tenable.
Yeah,
To
France
just
really
always
busted a
hide
move
behind
there.
free speech, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious too, like political positioning, geopolitical positioning as far as what is going on behind the scenes with France vis-a-vis what's going on in Ukraine, and the extent to which Telegram has been used by unit level commanders on the Russian side in the Ukrainian
Or
war. I mean,
even
it's a lot of
Ukrainians
tangled
use it
issues.
a lot, right? So
Well, true, yeah, true.
yeah. All right. So your recommendations?
My recommendation. So one that just popped up over the past couple of weeks here that I'm really impressed with. There's a small company called Emergent Methods, and it's a team. They're really coming out of, on the one hand, science backgrounds, research. On the other hand, doing a lot of high performance infrastructure with Ray and Spark and other things that we know about and talk about all the time. And they said, "Hey, look, we'd like to pick off some use cases. So how about transparency in media? What if we could scan news sources around the world, but then fine-tune LLM models? And so they've got Phi3 Mini that they've done some work with, and they're using it to basically, you can parameterize what you're looking for, and then you can also get a measure off of how sensationalized is this? What's the biases in here? But then what's the structure of the content that's coming out actually as a knowledge graph? And so you can be using LLMs to grab a whole bunch of data out of different sources, but you start to understand what's the bias in these sources, but then use that graph to go back in and ground the LLM subsequently. So there's an initial offering called Ask News, which is really easy to integrate. They also have a really great Hugging Face space, a demo up on Hugging Face for Phi3 Mini and Strut Graph, which basically shows what they're doing. Some beautiful visualizations. So I wanted to shout out to friends out there. I really like to tell you the truth, it's beautiful work in Knowledge Graph. And talking with a team that did it, a few months ago, they hadn't even started working with graphs. So it's a real testament that they, have come out of these backgrounds in AI and data engineering and are producing something in a new domain. Really spectacular.
Interesting. Yeah. So for me, I've been recommending books. This time I'll recommend a couple of long reads. The first one is How Machines Learn to Discover Drugs by Dhruv Kular in the New Yorker. So basically, AI for developing antibiotics, which is a huge problem, as some of our listeners may know. Um, so identify antibiotics from large chemical libraries and design new molecules. The other one is called The Asteroid in Spring Hypothesis, a long read from New York Magazine, Carrie Howley, who's one of my favorite writers. So this is the controversy between two paleontologists, Robert De Palma and Melanie During, over a research site in North Dakota, which may contain evidence of asteroid impact that killed dinosaurs. Both highly engaging and highly entertaining reads. And so with that, thank you, Paco.
Thank you, Ben.